No, I think she was just saying that. But.
Sure. Okay. And it's recording?
Maybe that'll.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like until 5, right? Because I have to. Oh, it's exactly 4 o'clock. Come on. So we'll get started. Most of you know me, and I know most of you, for those who don't. Hi, I'm Marianthi with the NIEHS department, and with Tom, we co-direct the. Never remember the name. The data facility core.
And data science.
That one. The study design and data sciences core of the P30. This is a combined seminar for P30 and T32 because hopefully this will be useful to everyone. That's the hope. So we'll get started. I'll start by talking in the beginning and like theoretically about why these things are important and why we care, how we can use them in our lives. And then Jaime Benavides, who is an associate research scientist in the department, and he's been working with me for several years. So he's been doing this with me for quite some time now. Will share his lived experience beyond just the theory of things. I'll also start by saying that it's now been maybe 6-7 years since my trainees decided that to ban me from coding because I never learned how to speak tidy. I'm that old. I did my PhD before tidy and deployer, and I was confusing them all. So that said, and there's Jaime, you cannot see him. Hi, Jaime, can you hear us? We cannot hear you though. Wait. The hearing part now is more.
Hello? You hear me, Jaime?
Okay, while this is figured out, maybe. Although is about coding today and how we can code better, share code, code reviews, reproducibility, all these amazing things. I will start by saying the most important thing is that we know the theory
Hello.
what we want to code. That's the most important thing. Beautiful code cannot make up for not understanding the theory. And I had a very interesting ChatGPT experience recently. I was trying to help a student with modification and multiple imputations and how we pull. And many using ChatGPT for coding advice is amazing.
Hello.
But no, oh, awesome. Success. Hi.
Okay, thank you.
Hi. And ChatGPT is amazing for coding advice, but it does not know the stats. So it did give me a solution that worked, that did not give me any errors, that yielded a number, popped up number in the screen. It was wrong. So beautiful code does not make up for not understanding what you're doing. If you learn anything today, that's the most important thing to keep in mind. So if you had to pick beautiful code, correct code is always the way to go. So, you stay there. So this is the three main things that we'll talk today. I'll start with good coding practices and code review, and this is theory. And then Jaime will take over for the in practice part. So this is it's a bit long, and happy to share slides afterwards. It's verbatim taken out of a consensus study report by the National Academies on using data science in general. But the important thing is down here. Documenting and sharing workflows, coding workflows, enable others to understand how data have been used and refined and what steps were taken in an analysis process. This can increase the confidence in results and improve trust in the process, as well as enable reuse of analysis or results in a meaningful way. So that's, in a nutshell, why we're doing this today. There's a chair there, so you can take it. So we all code. If we're here, we all code. It doesn't matter the field. It doesn't matter if we're doing super advanced statistics or even toxicology these days, everybody codes. So it's increasingly important in what we do. And most of us start coding and writing code without necessarily considering with coding practicing, right? As long as it works, as long as I get that number, that's fantastic. And indeed, that's what we care about. But this approach, as long as it works, is more prone to errors and ends up being inefficient. So using good coding standards and applying them and following them is key in modern data science. Everything we do is data science. It helps us ensure quality in our research and save us time. So all of these are very important things to consider. So the 4 C's of a good code are that the code needs to be correct, clear, contained, and consistent. What does this mean? Correct, that's how we started the session, means that the code needs to be correct to implement what we want the computer to do. Does it do what the method is supposed to do? Theoretically, how we understand the method. We need to understand the method theoretically. It needs to be clear so we can understand what it is supposed to be doing and make appropriate modifications. This is both clear to other people who read our code or to ourselves when we read the code the next day or in 6 months when the reviewers come back and they want revisions. Or in 5 years when we want to tell someone else how to do something. It needs to be contained. This means, please, I'm using the word needs. It doesn't need, as I said, in the end of the day, we want something that works. It's good if it's contained. That means we use data frames instead of multiple individual vectors. We use functions to reuse code instead of copying and pasting. You'll hear me a lot talking against copying and pasting today. Keep code used frequently. So for example, if we keep a piece of code, if we use a piece of code across multiple projects many times, so for example, how we pick control days in a case crossover study, right? And we do this on multiple papers, then instead of copy and pasting this piece of code, maybe we want to put that in a script or a package that we then call automatically. And it needs to be consistent. It's good to be consistent in terms of style, naming conventions, etc. So these are the 4 C's. And next, we're going to talk about some ways, it's not an exhaustive list, of how we can achieve these 4 C's when we code. Naming conventions, consistent styles, use tools that support reproducible workflows, do not copy and paste, and avoid hard coding, consistency checks, and version control. And we'll go over these. So we'll start with naming conventions and consistent style. So oftentimes when we start playing with something, right, I'll use test 1, df1, df2, which is good because that's how I started. I'm playing with the data. I haven't really thought much about it yet, but I start doing this, and then these propagate, and then I have df to d11, like 1,000 lines later, and I have no idea what any of these means, right? So meaningful variable and function names from the very beginning ends up being very useful later on as well. Consistent capitalization. So these are the names of different ways that we can name variables. So consistently using camel case, that means if I have multiple words concatenated, every word except the first one has capitalized first letter, or all, including the first one, capitalized, or use lower dashes. How is it called? Underscores. Thank you. But be consistent on how we use things. File and object naming conventions. If I'm creating files to share with my group, it's good that we all follow the same naming conventions. So just by looking at a name of something, object, file, anything, I know what it means. So for example, if I'm preparing air pollution data predictions to share, maybe I want to have the name in this order: pollutant, spatial domain, temporal resolution, right? Things like that. Consistent use of white space and indentation. This is not for the code to run, but it's much nicer if the code is visually nice. So adding white space instead of having very tight lines, or at some point I was a weird PhD student. I got so much into I have to reduce the number of lines of code at any expense. And I was using, is it columns? Like to have multiple, don't do that. It's okay if it's longer, as long as it's clear, it's not a busy eye. Indentation to know levels within functions, for example, of things that you're running. And effective use of comments. That makes the code more clear, that helps us remember and allows others to understand what we did. And comments cannot make up for poorly structured code. They are there to help, not take over. Also, don't wait for me to finish talking. This will never happen. If you have any questions, please interrupt me. I should have said that at the beginning. Yes, so is that this? Perfect. Reproducible workflows. So copying, pasting output from the console to a paper, very bad idea, because you have to do it so many times. I guarantee you there's no chance these numbers won't change many times. Also, copying, pasting in general is the #1 source of errors. So instead, highly recommend use of reproducible workflows that can facilitate tracking results. And that includes our Markdown, Jupyter Networks, Quarto. I haven't used Quarto. If anyone has and has thoughts, please let me know. All these can reduce reliance on automated copy-paste steps and multiple intermediate files, because everything is there from the beginning, importing the data to the final paper, and that's fantastic. I will say here, probably you are thinking, I'd be thinking too, okay, Marianthi, but to figure all these things out takes so much time. And I agree. Like starting without starting, DF1 to DF11, starting in our markdown, it does take a lot of time. But it's an initial time investment that will save you so much time in the long run. So that's what we care about. Yes, a day, 3 days at the beginning, a few more hours, it's worth all the hours in your life afterwards. So starting with good coding practices does end up saving you many more hours than if you didn't do it. Well, that's my biggest pet peeve. Do not copy paste and avoid hard coding. These two things are probably the largest sources of errors. Hard coding is that, I don't ask if you all know what I'm talking about. I'm hoping that you raise your hand if you don't know something and ask me. So hard coding, for example, if I write something and I always say full column 2, so it's always number 2, right? But then the data sets may change, the numbers, column 2 may be different things in half an hour. So instead, use functions that encapsulate the repeated code. That's for the copying pasting. Avoid like if you're running, I don't know, gums, right? And you copy paste the gum for every exposure and every outcome, and then you have 25 different models. Just use different functions. Just use functions, right? Functions allow identification of what's changing, the argument, the exposure, and the outcome in this example. And it simplifies the code, and it allows people to follow, and it reduces the probability of errors. Very important here. However, try to avoid using too many loops, because that can, even though that's I think, really reduces to potentially eliminates the probability of errors. They are very computationally expensive, so this can take much longer. So also it depends here on the data size that you're working. Of course, for all of this, very different if we're working with 200 observations versus 60 million observations, right? We're not talking about today. We can have another session if you'd like about computational efficiency at that scale. So this session won't have parallelization, blah, blah, blah. But that can be another session if you are interested in. Okay, consistency checks. Very, very, very extremely important. Marianthi, you say that at every slide. I do, because they are all important. So we start writing our code without checking every step. So I see it with many of my trainees. They write the code, and then 100 lines later, they're like, this doesn't make sense. I get a negative age. Age shouldn't be negative. So that's probably because there was a step that the code didn't do what it was supposed to be doing, and we didn't check it. And then it was too late. And then we have to go trace back all our steps. So this can propagate errors throughout the code. So we do need to have frequent consistency checks. What this means, did the function I just performed produce plausible result? When I'm building a function that's not only one model, but it has multiple steps, have I tested every step before I make it a function and I keep using it? Does my new data frame look like it's supposed to do in shape, in missingness, right? Am I expecting to have 3 rows or 1,000 rows? What did I get? What did it perform, right? Before I'm doing the next thing. Are the values that I'm producing within the expected range? So for example, non-negative concentrations, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So consistency checks, very important.
Yes. May I add something?
Yes.
So oftentimes I have students who start to code without even looking at the data first. So I think learning the data is really important before you start on sophisticated analyses. Can you say something about that?
Yes, absolutely. Understanding our data is so useful if, for example, you have a huge value in the distribution of either your X or your Y. You don't track it as an outlier, you don't ping it, you do the entire analysis. And the worst thing is if you get results that you expect and you never notice about it. And then submit the paper and then revisions come and a reviewer asks something. And then you notice that all your results are because of that one single point that you could have identified at the very beginning, but now everything is different. So understanding, visualizing distributions of data, visualizing correlations of data, summary statistics, missing patterns, all these are extremely important before even starting to think about anything else. Understanding the data is, thank you for this comment, is extremely important. Yes.
One thing I get hung up with for in relation to the consistency check, like I want to put my things into this, but I also, you know, at this step, I want to like see all the graphs, like look at a particular thing. Then I feel like I break it up by model more, so it's like technically repetitive. I think I have a balance, having trouble between balancing putting so much into a loop, but also like breaking it apart so I can see what's happening.
Agreed, and it depends on what the loop is doing or what the functions are doing, right? First of all, to build the loop, you never build a loop before making sure that every step works, never. But then yes, if you need to check that not only that your model worked and spit something, but you need to check, I don't know, residual distribution or if things are nonlinear, and then yes, you have to do these checks. So then that's a necessity that you need, and you can either still build the loop, but spit all these files out, and then you can just like plots, look at the plots as intermediate outputs and flag things, or then you'd have to go back and change the loop extracting. So otherwise you just, break it by model, and that's fine. So that's an important comment. Efficient code is great, but we also do want it to work. So we need to be able to check. So just putting everything in a loop, if that doesn't allow us to have consistency checks, then that's not useful. Wait, I forgot where we are. So we said this. And finally, version control. So using things like GitHub. So it's great for collaborative coding, and we'll go to this next, but also it's great if we are the only ones who will ever see that code. If it's like for a class project, it's not even for a paper, right? It helps us, it's useful as a record of progress. I'm seeing what I'm doing. Backup of successful versions while avoiding multiple files, right? So if I've built something, it works, then I have to go back, change something, everything is broke. Oh no, then I have to figure out but now I have a record that I can go back to a previous successful version. Instead of restarting from scratch, I start from step 5. It's easy by to publish code. I don't know if I've heard colleagues of mine, that's admittedly mostly in CS and stats, but that they would, if someone applies for a postdoc position for them, they'll check their GitHub for their code. So if that's of interest, that's fantastic. And you have your code up. I don't know that anyone checks random people's code on GitHub and sets comments, but if they do, that's also fantastic because that improves their code. So highly recommend using something like GitHub, and it facilitates collaborative coding, which brings us to the next. Yes.
Wait, before we leave GitHub, I feel like I know the easy way that we learn to do GitHub is to make the project and version control the project, but often that includes all of the files, including the data, and that's just something that I haven't figured out, and I've never gotten a clear answer from anyone about how to do the git ignore stuff so that I'm not having the data as a part of my R project where I need it to pull. So when I'm working on my R project, I get to have my data, but the data is not pushed to GitHub. And that's something that I haven't gotten a clear answer on, and I haven't been able to figure out. And if someone understands that, knows more about that, because I feel all the work that I do is not public record. So I can't use, it's all private data and protected data.
The git ignore doesn't
I don't know how to get it to work. Great.
You have your data in like a separate data folder?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I just like, I've looked it up, but Tori said she could help me, so maybe that solves my problem. Has anyone else like run into that or?
Good question, which is if that's sufficient for IRB for personal, I don't know, individual level health data, like how
So
secure it is to have.
it is not.
Yeah.
I don't think, no, because it's online.
But if it's like.
The code is, yes, yeah. So if it's not pushed, it's okay. But if the data are pushed, that's not okay.
But if it's like marked private, how private, like how, yeah, I don't know
I
how to
do
approach.
not know the answer to that either. But I can figure it out, let you know.
Or if there's an analog that like has better privacy.
I don't know about that either. But that is, yes, always be very careful about pushing data, especially protected data on GitHub. Also, if you're doing something like our Markdown, outputs that may include, right? For example, as consistency checks, many times I'll do like a head of a data set. Does it look like it's supposed to be? That should also not be on GitHub or on our Markdown. So be very careful of that as well, because that's not the full data set, but it is private data.
Even if it's like de-identified, we're still just the head of a de-identified file.
It depends.
That's bad.
Yes, I would say always err on the side of caution. I mean, if it's all air pollution and SCS data and has nothing, then probably okay. Unless it's someone's personal exposure, then not okay. So I would always err on the side of caution. And when in doubt, check with your PI and your IRB protocol. But better safe than sorry in this thing. Because I've heard stories about, that was a study many years ago when I was a PhD student, that they were talking, it happened years before I was a PhD student, but someone messed up with data that were identifiable, and it was an investigator, but not part of the team, who ended up knocking on one of the participants' door. So we never want anything like that to accidentally happen. Always err on the side of caution. Yes.
And it really depends on the level of data you're using. It's individual level data, be really careful. If you've aggregated across geographic areas, that's not identifiable, but the individual, we had a situation here many years ago where somebody wanted the data that we published on and had the data from another publication and was industry, and they wanted to sort of see if they could figure out some individuals, and that's no good. So we went to the IRB and to the Columbia Attorney's Office. So we actually didn't give them the data. So you have to be really careful. Even if it's de-identified, smart people can put it together.
Also, be careful with the data source, because even if you have, say, identifiable individual level data and you aggregate, let's say Medicare data, right? I have access to the individual level data, but then I aggregate and then it's fine. There's still the CMS in this case, or the interested organizations have requirements about small cells. So even if you say, okay, aggregate it, but if it's, I think Medicare is like below 12, you're still not allowed to post that, even if it's aggregated.
Mhm.
So be very careful with aggregations occasionally as well, if you have small cell numbers. This is not to terrify you. This is also all your data. So you're also protecting with yourselves with these good practices.
Clarification, when you're talking about our Markdown and the reproducibility of it, like you mean for like this IRB stuff, just don't publish it to like the HTML version, right? Because you can use an R Markdown, but just have none.
Yeah. If it's for your screen, yes, because you have to take a look. That's the consistency check, right? But nothing that leaves your, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or it's online or all these things. Right. How are we doing this? This is not going great. Sorry, Jaime. I'll do this very quick as I can. Code review. So Benefits of code review. The largest benefit that I think, you may disagree and that's okay, for me is that I feel more confident about what I publish. It's a good idea to have a second set of eyes on codes. We all make silly mistakes, and unless there's an error there, we may not notice because all of us are overworked and, you know, we do all make errors. So second set of eye on code is good. Does the code do what it's supposed to be do? Is it corresponding to what I said in the methods? I had once, I was a visiting trainee from a different country, and they gave me the paper to read. We were working together, but I hadn't seen the code. We were discussing, I had told them to do penalized splines for something, this number of knots, blah, blah, blah. And I read the paper, the methods section, fantastic. And then something like when the results didn't make sense. So I said, okay, let's see the code. And I looked at the code and it wasn't a spline. It was so weird. And I'm like, wait, what? So does it correspond to the method section? Copy pasting and hard coding errors, very bad. Always nice if someone else also checks that I didn't copy paste the same outcome as above, even when I think it's a different biomarker. Ultimately, it improves our coding skills when we know others will also see our code, right? We are more self-conscious, we try more, which also includes our coding skills. And also when we're the reviewer, we may see something like, oh, that's such a good idea. I can do this when I'm coding. And it promotes reproducibility. So how we do it in my lab, we've been doing this now for many, many years. I think we started doing it, not the first year that I came, but the second year that I came. We have requirements for all papers that come out of my lab before they're submitting, they have to be code reviewed. So once the manuscript is finalized, so we've decided we're not making any change, at least for now, on the code, and we're at the editing stage, we identify a code reviewer in the lab. So that means another lab member who is not too involved in the project. If the lab is small, obviously everybody's involved in multiple projects, but not too heavily involved, is identified as a code reviewer. We ask for volunteers. It's a volunteer-based job because everybody's busy and it's not an assignment when you also have finals or a deadline. If multiple people volunteer for a specific paper, in my lab, this is how we do it. It doesn't mean that it always has to be this way. Speak within your labs and see what it works. Priority gets to the one who has done the fewest code reviews. Code reviewers are co-authors on the paper. That's the game, because otherwise, why do it? For the good of society, but also. Yeah. So code review takes place while the manuscript is out to co-authors. So there's no time lost there. It's usually about 2 weeks, but then it can take up to a month. Code reviewers check the code, make sure that it does what it is described in the methods section, assess potential bugs in the code that were missed, check that all numbers have been transferred to the manuscript correctly. Obviously, if we're using a reproducible workflow, this is not so much an issue, but we don't always do that. Carefully reads and edits the manuscript as a co-author. That's a co-author responsibility. And all published papers include a link to the first author's GitHub page with the code. This is the maximizing reproducibility thing. And I know many people are scared to put the code out there. It is extremely scary, I understand. But if there is a mistake, we do want it to be found out, one. And two, we also want others to benefit from the effort that we did and use our code. And there's no need to keep reinventing the wheel over and over. So lesson learned, although it is extra work, we have found in the lab again that everybody gains. It's good for everyone. And by we, I don't mean me. I'm increasingly becoming a worse coder, but everybody else in the lab is becoming a better one. We learn more methods, right? If it's a new method, I'm a code reviewer on a paper on a method that I haven't heard before. I learn about this method hands-on, which is fantastic. We are much more confident about our published results. Did you guys see what happened with the black spatulas that were then a full decimal point off? This would have prevented that. and everybody would have felt safer. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's okay. Trainees have more papers. Ultimately, someone will count your papers, so it's nice if that number is larger number. And the tricky part is that when we're looking at identifiable data, this is not always shareable even within the group. So that is slightly trickier because you cannot rerun every step, but it's still possible, right? The code reviewer can still check outputs, summary statistics that look at the code at least. So it is harder to do, but it's not impossible, and the benefit is still there. So how can you do it? You can talk to your advisors, and if I don't see that anyone would, I don't think that anyone would be against it, but if they are, you can explain the benefits. You can send them to me, I can be very convincing. If in a lab with multiple people, then you set up your own processes, what works within the lab, the dynamics, right? I describe what we do in my lab. That doesn't have to be the same, doesn't have to look the same everywhere else. Timing to review, publishing code, etc. If not in a large lab, many of us are in a lab with 1 or 2 people only, and then that's, too much work. Or for some reason, for some project, there are no volunteers available. Email me, your advisor needs to have agreed on this. And I can help us facilitate find a code reviewer for that. And yes, I will now let Jaime. Jaime, I didn't leave you much time, but you're up. I'm sorry.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, but wait, I need to stop sharing. No, I stopped sharing. We can hear
Can
you.
you
Yes,
all
sorry.
hear me well? Yeah. How much time do we have?
Carolina? Half an hour. Let me see, not slides.
He has to share it.
You have to share your slides.
But for this part, how long?
25 minutes until 5.
Okay. I thought it was gonna be shorter.
Oh yes, if it's shorter, it's better. No, shorter is good.
Yeah,
Time for questions.
yeah, maybe we can do it quite interactive. So my part is gonna be on the practice of like experiencing this code review, and maybe sorry also for not being there with you. I couldn't join today in person. I given that Marianthi covered quite a lot of it, I'm gonna try and make it a bit more interactive to talk about this code review. Maybe we can do also questions and answers with Marianthi. And I'm gonna share my personal experience in a couple of minutes, if that's okay with you.
They're nodding.
Okay. Cool. So thank you, Marianthi, for getting me into this code review practice. So I've been now coding for kind of like 12 years. And before coming to Columbia to work with Marianthi, I did a PhD developing an air pollution model for a city in Barcelona, Spain. And it took like 5 years in the group where I was working to have someone to look at my code. It's not like that fully, but we didn't have like code reviews in the papers or anything. At the end of my PhD, they hired a postdoc who spent like 6 months looking into my model development, and it was a big nightmare. Like every week he would come with questions, potential bugs, problems in the code. So it's important, in the open source, like the principles of open source code, like to do reviews and also to release the code early and often. So that's something that I think with this practice of code reviewing, for example, from the perspective of someone who is the first author of a paper, when you are aware that there is this culture of that there will be a colleague looking at your code, if it's consistent with each step in the methodology, in the paper, with each number, with each figure, that means a lot. That makes you like work even better than your quality standards. And when I got to Marianthi's group, I realized doing my first review of a colleague paper that the quality standards of the code were really good, like also shared standards on how to structure the code, how to document it. And I learned a lot. And I think that part of that experience that was shared was that culture of reviewing the code that make everyone increase a little bit like the quality. So I also did. I started structuring these repositories that then we share in these common repositories in the cloud, in GitHub, in a way that was readable, that was understandable. And in each script, I forced myself to document each step. As a coder, for me, it's something is related to creativity. So I like to flow coding. I don't like that much to document it while I'm doing it. But keeping in mind that there will be people looking into it in detail, it's like, okay, I need to go back to this and document it, right? So what we do is that right when there is the first draft ready to be sent to co-authors, we invite a volunteer, like open call for volunteers in the lab to have a reviewer, and the reviewer and the first author have at least one meeting. 1 hour is enough to have gain some familiarity with the work, show a little bit like the manuscript, the code, an overview of everything, and also to have like a timeline and next steps. And then in the coming, as Marianthi said, like couple of weeks, the reviewer is looking in very detail, as much detail as possible, to everything, like the manuscript, the consistency between the tables, graphs, and the methods, line by line. How did you do this? If I can't find it in the code, I'm gonna ask, and I need you to provide an answer. So it's not very straightforward to prepare for the first author, but you improve a lot your quality standards, and we all learn. Also from the perspective of the reviewer, that I have been very lucky to also review papers of colleagues. I learned a lot from different methodologies, again, ways to structure the code. And yeah, also being part as a co-author of a paper is also important for my career. And I think the code reviewers deserve to be co-authors, because it's like a work that you do like during 2-3 weeks, and you can improve the quality of the paper and contribute to it by looking in detail to the manuscript and also to the code and the consistency of everything. So yeah, that's in general what I wanted to say. Then please, do you have any questions regarding like from the perspective of the reviewer or the one who is preparing the review? Also, Marianthi and I can answer to them. Thank you.
Marianthi cannot answer. She's never code reviewed. Was not required.
But you prepare.
I can try, yes. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I guess my question is, have you ever reviewed for a paper that you were not necessarily like very familiar with in practice with the method, or like, how is that matching made between?
I can answer because I reviewed Jaime's paper.
DJ is there. Okay.
So I joined group last year, and then after joining, Marianthi told that we have rule that everyone should review, and then they decide based on who has the least number of views, and I had zero because I just joined. So that was the method PCT, which I heard from you, Marianthi, but I know somehow PCA. So I was interested to know more about PC, but then I said, okay, let's do it so that I know method more, also know the code more. So I think this started, things happened, and then yeah, I think I reviewed that. That was my first experience. So I didn't know much about the paper honestly, but yeah, I got draft, written draft which I can read. I got also code in hand. I got also the data. So I had all things in hold, and I kept asking questions from him. Hey, what do you mean by that? Does it make sense or not? Yeah. So I think this is how it went well.
And I will add to this, not on how it's done, but that this was on my end a very specific decision to not match people who necessarily has expertise in the method. So it's a training opportunity for the code reviewer. So that was the decision that we made in the lab exactly for that. But that doesn't mean that every lab has to make that decision. There are maybe labs that we're like, no, we want to, prioritize efficiency. We want to do this quickly. We want to make sure that the reviewer already knows the method. But the reason why we're doing it is exactly that, because now, Vijay knows PCT, and Jaime, when the first one you did was it like Bayesian something as well, right? The conditional Poisson or something. So that's how you learn, and that's why you're all here. Hopefully. Yes.
How about, does anyone have experience with doing it with identifiable data, or where the reviewer didn't have access, wasn't on the IRB for it, and how they?
I don't know, Jaime, when Gali did neural line.
I did it with Gali's paper, and it's not super straightforward. Like it's hard to do it, but you can follow the whole process of like how the models are built, how all the data descriptives are generated, the post-process of the data, like how the graphs are built. Like a lot of the methodology is about like step by step being able to follow, and also about the documentation, like because we want also the code to be well documented, so somebody else who is gonna find that paper who wants to learn from that methodology and potentially like maybe not reproduce the results, but use that to those models to have some more scientific progress starting from there. Like you want them to know step by step what happened, to have readable code. So even if you don't have access to the data, it's very important like to document it properly so you can trace back from the manuscript to the code where everything happened. So it's still, I think, adding value even if you don't have access to certain regions of the data.
And you can still ask the code writer to share all the intermediate outputs, not the head, as we said, because you cannot actually see the data, but all the intermediate outputs of every single thing, and that's okay. And that facilitates this process. It's still harder, but it's easier if you just look at the code and yes.
Yeah, at least some examples, some parts, like if they run like 15 models, like running some of them to see that things are working like they are supposed to do.
Sabajas,
What about sharing like CD pages?
So that's we did discuss extensively this potential thing, both for the lab, but also when we put the code out there, right? And we decided for lab, I think that's a fantastic idea and people should do this. But realistically, to create the time it takes to create a simulated data set with all the issues, because the problem is the issues, right? If the data set was perfect to begin with, then the code writing part would be. So I think that's a whole other time-consuming thing that's extremely important. But that means that everybody in the lab has fewer papers because that's a whole thing by itself. So we decided not to do that, but I highly encourage people to do that if they have the time, or at least once. We're talking with J Biosimulations, learning how to simulate data is extremely useful because also, as a parenthesis, that's an amazing way to test what you think for potential biases. So I'm using this study design, I'm using this model. I think that the bias would go this way. I cannot really tell with the data. You simulate data and you test it out. So that's, if you ever want to talk simulations, come see me. I can talk all day. But yes, that's reasons I just said we didn't. Yes.
Do you have any advice for how to make parts of your analysis that are not particularly well reproducible more so? So like, for example, there are like certain spatial data manipulations that are much easier to do inside ArcGIS than in R. So like in labs that I've been in, we'll have like a component of the analysis that's done in ArcGIS through the menu, and then you take that out and then put it into R, and then you do the code. And then so the code part in R is reproducible, but it's really hard to reproduce the like click-based analysis.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I make everyone in the lab do it in R. They learn No,
Yeah,
sorry.
from my experience, and I've done quite a lot of things with like spatial data. You can do everything or almost everything with R nowadays. I would say like 5 or more, 5 to 10 years ago, it wasn't like that. But nowadays, at least from my view, you can do most of the things. So yeah, I would try to move as much as possible to more like code-based development, to be able to trace everything back.
And the other concern with ArcGIS specifically is if the goal is to put your code out there so it's reproducible, even if ArcGIS were code, it's not open access, so you are asked to keep, that's secondary, but Jaime, we have no.
But sorry, but also I think ArcGIS gives you also a report on the code working behind the scenes, right? In Python.
Yeah, Python, I think, behind that.
So, yeah, maybe that's also useful.
If you don't have any questions now, but as you think this over or talk with there is a question. Yes.
I'll just do one more. In all of your experience, has there been anything that like best facilitated the code review process? Like any best practices to know them? Timings?
What has made things easier?
I had a presentation prepared, and so I was checking back some code reviews, and I think it's a lot about communication, and right, like I'm trying to make things easy to the reviewer when you are preparing the code, but also the reviewer, for example, with Vivian, I remember when she was communicating to me her review, she even had a color scheme using green for her comments that indicating that still looking for code that supports the manuscript. Then in blue, indicating what she already found, and in orange, questions for follow-up. So yeah, like good practices, I think, like enhancing like communication and being creative on how to make it also kind of fun. Yeah, that was the first thing that came to mind.
I will say at this point, it's very easy, especially if you work closely with someone, to sit next to each other and they explain everything they did, like the code writer to the code reviewer. And that's kind of against the point, because then that's easier to misthink if you have everything explained. And no, yes, that makes sense. And then so trying to do this very like as independently as possible, and with questions I don't get that, like that's documented, that facilitates identifying potential mistakes.
Yeah. And also like being super detailed, like not being scared of doing the role of code reviewing. I remember Vijay is there. I remember Vijay in that paper that he was reviewing and learning PCP, like he came to me and said, like, look, this plot I generated with your code is slightly different to the one on the paper, right? And we went through like a conversation through email and even a meeting until we found out what was going on, that on the process to find the optimal configuration of the model, that he was still like learning on how to run it. Like there was an inconsistency between what he was doing and what I had done in the paper, but that was a problem of me documenting the code. He couldn't follow the whole thing. And so it was very important for him to be super detailed and take initiative to communicate it to me, so I could improve it and make more robust the code documentation and then the paper better.
That's a practical question. I haven't done comments on GitHub.
Jaime, can you comment on GitHub on someone else's code? You can, right?
I couldn't hear.
Can you comment on someone else's code on GitHub? Yes, because you share, and as long as you have the comments.
Yeah,
if for example, they know it's yours.
If you are given permission as a collaborator, you can 100% comment on it. Also, if the repositories allow anybody to provide comments, you can also do it. Like, I think we are all, if you are coding, you are getting a lot of benefit from GitHub, because many people develop their packages on GitHub. Whenever there are issues in the packages with functions, like people in this part called issue that document like what the problem they have and they solve it. So then the functions improve and we get better packages to do our work. And many of those things are documented on GitHub, and we can, if you have the same problem, you can go and find the solution also there. So yeah, that's very useful. But typically what we do in the review is that to add as a collaborator the reviewer, and the reviewer would provide comments in each script, adding their name and also adding like a file with a summary of all the comments for the first author to follow through them and then ask questions if needed.
Yes.
When you're creating a table to check numbers within a manuscript, is there a way to check the numbers in a more efficient way than visually checking the table that you've recreated and the numbers in the manuscript? Or is there like a systematic way that you go about this rather than just visually looking at like, this is in my table and this is in your table?
Well, if you use a reproducible workflow, that's automated. Otherwise, I cannot think of something. The way I used to do it, I do tech a lot, so I would spit out tables from R in tech and then just import those tech tables in my manuscript, so it was the same. It wasn't copy pasted by any means. But I don't know. Again, that's many years ago. Yeah. But also depends how the first person did it. And if they copied pasted, then that's not great. I guess you could, I've also done spit it out as a CSV file or an Excel and then copied that table and included that table as a table. So I don't copy paste. I in general try to avoid copy pasting as much as possible. Okay. Thank you, Jaime. Thank you, everyone. Well, maybe.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
For being here, and hopefully this was useful. If you are interested, have any questions, want to talk more, I can help on the theoretic aspect of doing things. Jaime, I'm volunteering every day as well, can help you with how to actually do things. We're here. We really encourage all of everything that we've said today.
And the center has a GitHub page.
Oh, yes, Jaime. Can you show me?
And we're encouraging people to use our GitHub page. So especially for the trainees, if you need to learn how to do something, that perhaps there'll be an example on the GitHub page.
Exactly.
So please.
And I've asked already all my lab members to upload published GitHub. Yeah, Jaime is sharing. So first of all, sign up. Let me email me. I'll add you to our GitHub page if you're not a member already. And then you can link your code to there, and then it's there. That's the paper that Jaime published a year ago now. Or I guess, yeah, that was the code was 2023. So you can see the paper, see the code. Okay.
So we encourage everybody on both on center members and T32 trainees to use the GitHub page, please.
Because again, there's no reason to reinvent the wheel if it's already done.
We push our code to our own,
Yes.
push our code to our own GitHub and then also put it there.
Yeah. What I've done is, so I have the code in my GitHub, and then I do fork it, which is like going from the center GitHub. I fork my my repository in my own account, and this fork thing means that they are gonna be linked. So now it's gonna show up in the center's GitHub, but it's gonna still be linked in a way that if I make changes in my account and in my repository, they are also gonna show up in the center's repository. So this is, it would be great to have more and more projects there because it's really easy to learn from each other, see what other people are doing, and maybe also like share resources or ask each other for collaboration on things. So yeah, I think it's a great initiative.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you, Jaime.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Marianthi. Thank you, Jaime. Thank you, Carolina, for setting this up. We didn't have any research presentations today, but we have February 26th, March 26th, April 30th, and May 7th. I'll send this around. I'll ask for signups for volunteers.